Baruch Hashem, today's Daf Yomi is Avodah Zarah Daf Tesvav, Avodah Zarah 15. We're going to start in the bottom of Yudalad Amud Beis, the bottom of 14b. Daf is dedicated for a Shemir for the Chayalim, Matzal for the Shvuyim, and the Yeshua for Am Yisrael on this Eis Tzara. We'll start at the Mishnah on the bottom of 14b. The Mishnah says, Malkum shenagu imkor behema daka ovdei kochavim mokrin. Malkum shenagu shalom korim mokrin. There were certain places where they said it's no problem to sell a sheep or a goat, what's called a behema daka, to a idolater, but there are other places where they said that they weren't allowed to sell it. And the reason why they weren't allowed to sell it is because the idolaters are suspected having intercourse with these animals, and it'd be a violation of one of the 7 no-hide laws for them to do that, and you'd be violating lifnei iver if you would give the animal to the idolater, because it's like you're encouraging them to sin or enabling them to sin. But we never sell them behemagasa, a large animal like an ox. And there, the concern is not the intercourse with the animal, but we'll see the Gemara is going to say that the concern has to do with Shabbos. And also, we don't sell agolim usiachim. We don't sell calves or baby donkeys, shleimin ushvarim, whether they're complete or broken, because this is all part of the same decree. Rabbi Yehuda matir b'shvur. Rabbi Yehuda allows a broken animal because there was no concern that it was going to work. If it had a broken leg, it's not going to work. And Ben Beseira matir b'sus. Ben Beseira allowed a horse, because in those days horses were not primarily used for work, primarily, and so therefore the concern was not that the animal was going to work on Shabbos. And true that you're not allowed to ride an animal on Shabbos, but that's a rabbinic prohibition, not a biblical prohibition. And so therefore, Beseira allowed you to sell a horse to an idolater. So the Gemara says, well, first we talk about the fact that there are some places where there was a custom not to sell an animal to an idolater because of the concern of intercourse. Of Meimra, says the Gemara, the Isura Leika Minhagahu the Ika, you mean to say, okay, it's just a custom that is prohibited, but it's not an actual Isur, it's not an actual prohibition. Well, if that's the case, you mean to say it's just following the practice. In some places it's permitted, in some places it's prohibited, because it's just a custom. Or the contradictory source, because we have the Mishnah later on that states, V'raminhi, says the Mishnah, which we're going to get to, God willing, Daf Chaf Beis, Baruch Hashem, next week. The Mishnah says, you're not allowed to leave, or like they would place their animal there for safekeeping. If it was an inn of idolaters, you're not allowed to leave it there because we're concerned about intercourse. So here the Gemara assumes that the Mishnah's case of selling, and where sometimes you're not concerned about the revia and sometimes you are, and this case of leaving it there is the same concept. And it says explicitly in the Mishnah that you're not allowed to leave it there because you're concerned about intercourse. So how can we say in our Mishnah that it's just a custom? So Rav explains, Makom Sheitir. So Rav's first answer is, no, it means that in the Makom Sheitir Mimkor Hitiru Yachid, in a place where you were allowed to sell it, there they allowed you to be secluded with this animal. Makom She'asru Yachid, a place where they didn't allow the idolater to be secluded with the animal. That's what our Mishnah is talking about when it says Asru Limkor. That's where it says it became the practice to sell it. So it depends on the place where they had the practice of allowing you to sell. That's when they allowed the animal to be secluded. But if they didn't have the practice where you're allowed to sell them, they wouldn't allow the animal to be secluded with the idolater. That's the answer that Rav gave. The Rabbi Elazar Omer on the top of 15a. Even if it's a place where they said you're not allowed to be secluded, mutar limkor, then under those circumstances we allowed you to sell it. Why? My timer. So Rabbi Elazar's position is that even if it was a place where we're concerned about leaving your animal with the idolater because they might have intercourse with it, you would still be allowed to sell it to the idolater. Why? Because an idolater doesn't want to basically sterilize his animal. And if the idolater would have intercourse with his animal, it would become sterile. And so that's Rabbi Eliezer's distinction. That the case of our Mishnah is talking about a case where it's a custom, because it's not actually prohibited to sell it, because the idolater is less likely to be with his own animal, but he has no problem being with the Jew's animal. So the Gemara says, "V'af Rav Haderbei," and even Rav actually said, "You know what? That Rabbi Eliezer's approach is the correct one." The Amarav Tachlifa Amarav Yishil Baravimin Mishmei the Rav Ovik Chavim Pasal Behemto Shalot Aker. An idolater is not going to have intercourse with his own animal, or is less likely to, because he doesn't want it to become sterile. And then our Mishnah had said that everyone says you're not allowed to sell a large animal like an ox. There, the concern is not intercourse because it's obviously dangerous. So, but you're not allowed to sell the ox. My time, why? Nehidu or vio cheshinan. Okay, we're not concerned about bestiality, but mavim be malacha cheshinan. We're concerned that you'll sell it to the idolater, and then the idolater will use it to work on Shabbos. So that's the concern. Gemara says, "Vini Avid." Well, what's the big deal? He's allowed to. His idolater is not commanded, and he's not allowed to keep the Shabbos. So the Gemara says, no. The Gemara says, "Vini Avid, given the Zavna Kanya." Once he buys it, he's acquired it. It's his. It's not yours anymore. Gemara says, no. We're concerned. Gzer misham she'elo misham sliris. No, we're concerned that you might come. If we're going to allow you to sell the ox, we're concerned that you might come to basically lend it out to him or to rent it out to him. And there we have a concern because it's not allowed for your animal to be working for the idolater on Shabbos. And so therefore, that's the concern. So Rashi says that there's a violation of the prohibition because it says lo sa'aseh kol mo'achav, and then it continues in that pasuk v'chol b'hamtecha, included in this prohibition of the fact that work cannot be done is the concern about your animal, and so therefore this is even a Jew is mitzuvah al shvisa. So the Jew is commanded not to have his animal working, and so therefore that's the concern. So the Gemara says, if you're going to sell it, you might come to lend it or to rent it out. So the Gemara says, but still, she'ela kanya v'agra kanya. What's the problem with that? Even if he lends it out or if he rents it out, the idolater has acquired it for the days that he's borrowed it, because he's responsible for certain things that, like an owner. So therefore, it should still be allowed for the idolater to work it on Shabbos. So El Amarami B'rei D'Rav, what's the reason why you're not allowed to sell the ox to the idolater? Because of the following situation. Gzeira Mishum Nisyone. We're concerned that the idolater who's purchasing the animal is going to want to test it out right when you sell it to him right before Shabbos. He doesn't take it back to his field. He's right there with the Jew, and he wants to test it out. Sometimes you're going to sell to him right before sunset, so on Erev Shabbos. Anyway, I'll say, come and let's test it out. And then the animal will hear the voice of its owner, and it will follow the owner. And the owner actually doesn't mind that it's coming after him. He wants it to follow him because it shows that this is a receptive animal. And it's a case of a prohibition, biblical prohibition, because the animal is doing work along with you. He has a burden on its back, and that's a prohibition on Shabbos. And that's going to be considered a biblical prohibition. We're in the middle of 15a. So the Gemara said basically, why can you not sell a ox to an idolater ever, because there's a concern you might come to sell it to him on Friday afternoon right before Shabbos, and then the ox will actually hear the Jew's voice and violate the Shabbos. So that's the concern. The Gemara says, "Well, Maskef Rav Sheisha Braid Ravidi." Well, wait 1 second. Your original suggestion was you might come to lend it out and rent it to him, and then it's like your animal is working on Shabbos. And we said, no, that can't be the concern, because if the idolater borrows it or rents it, he's actually acquired it, so it's not your animal. More challenges that assumption. The schirus mikanya is a rental really show that you acquired it, but didn't we learn in the Mishnah? Amru. I'm going to get to this also, God willing, next week. Even in those places where they said that you're allowed to rent to an idolater, they said they didn't allow you to rent for him to live there, because he's bringing into his house idolatry. And if you want to say, like our assumption is now, that when you rent it, you acquired it, why do we care if he's bringing in idols into the house that he rented? He's bringing to his own house because he's renting it. So why is that the Jew's problem? Gemara says, yeah, that you're correct, that the renter really hasn't acquired it, but this case is different. The case of idolatry is extra strict because it still has the name of the owner on it. And it's a violation. You're not allowed to bring this abomination of idolatry into your house. So another question. Again, he challenges the assumption that rental really is an acquisition. Is rental really an acquisition? Let's say a Jew rents a cow from a Kohen. So he's allowed to feed it the karshine. Karshine is a food that humans eat and animals eat. So if he designates it as truma, a Kohen's animal is allowed to eat it if it's animal food. A Kohen's animal is allowed to eat the truma, but a Jew's animal can't eat it. So let's say there's a Jew that rented a cow from a Kohen, so he can feed it the Kohen's truma, meaning even though the Jew rented it, it's still considered a Kohen's animal. The Kohen should sachar parami yisrael, and if a Kohen rented a cow from a Jew, even though the Kohen is feeding it, he can't feed it his truma vegetable. And if you want to say, like our assumption is that when you rent it, you acquired it, why can't he feed it? It's his own cow. So we see from here, we go back to our original assumption, that even though you rent it, you haven't acquired it. And so since we said that renting is not acquired it, then what's the reason why you can't sell it to a idolater? What's the reason why you can't sell an ox? There mishum sliros, because we're concerned you might come to rent it. There mishum she'ela, so we're concerned you might come to loan it out. There mishum nisyone, and we're concerned you might come to he might come to test it out, and you'll actually be violating it. So we see that. What's the reason why you can't rent it, an animal, out to an idolater? It's because of the concern that either you'll lend it or rent it out, or the concern that you'll sell it to him right before Shabbos and you'll actually do a violation with him. So that's why it says you know how to sell an ox to an idolater. But the Gemara is now going to show that there were some rabbis who actually figured out a way around this, or so not figured out is too loaded a term, but they didn't apply this exactly. Rabbi Ada Sharo Zabune Chamra. So Rav Ada allowed he allowed the sale of a donkey to an idolater. Ida de Safsira. He used basically a salesman, a broker, to sell it. How was he able to do it? He said, if we're worried about testing it out, he doesn't know my voice. The donkey knows my voice, not the broker's voice. The Alzamach must say that he's going to follow the broker. If you say we're worried he's going to lend it out, well, since it's not the broker's, therefore, we're not concerned he's going to rent it out. He's not going to lend it or rent it. Also, another reason, he doesn't want you to take it home because then you're going to discover a defect in it. So therefore, Rav Ada allowed you to sell an animal to an idolater using a broker. Rav Huna himself sold a cow to an idolater. So the Gemara says, Rav Chisda, my time Avin Marhachi. So he says, Rav Chisda says to him, how are you able to do this? We just said you're not allowed to do it. He says, no. Rav Huna says, says, no, because I'm going to say that he bought it to slaughter. He didn't buy it for work, so the prohibition doesn't apply. The prohibition of lifnei iver doesn't apply, or the prohibition of, it's not really lifnei iver, it's this gzeira of lending it or borrowing, it doesn't apply because maybe he bought it to slaughter it. So Gemara says, Umana Tamar Damrina Ki Agavna, do we allow you to say this case? Do we allow you to say this case in a case where there's a concern that he's going to be violating a prohibition with your animal, which is therefore lifnei iver? We say, no, you could say in this case it doesn't apply. Are we really able to do that? So the Gemara says, is that really the case? The Tanan, but the Gemara says, Rav Huna says, I'll bring a proof for it. I'll bring a proof that in a case where you could say that you can assume that there's a possibility that I was using it for something else, we don't have to be concerned about lifnei iver. How so? Because Beis Shammai said, this is the Mishnah in Shvius, Beis Shammai says you're not allowed to sell a person an ox that's used for plowing on the sabbatical year. Beis Hillel allows it because you can slaughter the animal. So we see from here that in a case, even though there'd be concern of lifnei iver, where you could say, oh no, maybe he's using it for something else, then we allow the sale. So Amar Rava says, Mi dami, the two cases are not the same. Hasam ein adam mitzuva al shvisas behema so b'shvius. Hacha adam mitzuva al shvisas behema b'shvius. Here there's a separate prohibition, as Rashi said on Amar Aleph, that you're not allowed to work your animal on the sabbatical year. So it's maybe even more than lifnei iver here. And so there's a specific prohibition. So the way Rashi explains it here is, since a person is not commanded about resting their animal on the sabbatical year, so we don't have to be concerned about borrowing it or renting it out to the idolater. And if you're concerned about lifnei iver, we say that he's going to slaughter it. But with respect to an idolater and Shabbos, a person is commanded that he's not allowed, specifically, he's not allowed to work as an animal. So it's a different case. Abaye says, so that was why Rava says the two cases are not the same. You should still not allowed to sell it. So it's not a good proof. So Abaye says, the Adam Mitzuva, sir, in the case where a person is a specific commandment on this animal, we're going to say it's prohibited, and you're not allowed to sell the because we're concerned about lifnei iver. Varei sada. What about a field? The Adam Mitzuva al Shvita Sadeh b'Shvius. A person is not allowed to work his field on the sabbatical year. Tanam Beis Shammai Omer Yimkor Adam Sada near b'Shvius. Beis Hillel Matirim. Beis Hillel allowed you to sell the field. Beis Shammai didn't allow, but Beis Hillel allowed you to sell it. Because he said maybe he's just buying it to leave it fallow. So we see from here that you can, if it's a place where you can assume that there's another reason, Tola, possible another reason, he allowed you to not be concerned about lifnei iver. Vitanya. So the Gemara says, well, maska for Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi challenges this again. If you say that you're not specifically commanded about it, like the case of the sabbatical year, it'd be permitted. Vare kalim. What about the utensils? The person is not allowed, is not commanded against working his utensils on the sabbatical year. Vitnan and kalim adam and we learn in Masechet Shvius, these are utensils that you can't sell, but Shvius in the sabbatical year. The plow, and all its utensils, all these farming utensils, you're not allowed to sell them. So we see, and even though he's not commanded that these utensils can't work, you're not allowed to sell them because of lifnei iver. So, and there you can't be. So So, and there's no way to be toa. Well, there's no other reason to sell it. So what's the distinction? Amar Vashi, kohecha de mitzvah talinan, afagav de mitzuva. So the question is not whether or not you're specifically commanded about resting this item or this animal or this utensil. The question is whether there's a possibility that it could be used for something else. So if there's a possibility it could be used for something else, we can assume that it's being used for something else, or we can say perhaps it's being used for something else, then we allow you to sell. But where there is no possibility, like in the case of the tools that he's buying, why else is he doing with farming tools in the sabbatical year? Then we don't allow you to sell it because of Lifnei Iber. So Rav Huna was allowed to sell it because he said maybe he's going to be slaughtering it. What? Well, that's the question. Exactly how much do you have to be? How much of a possibility? But he says, yeah, people buy an ox. They typically buy the ox to slaughter it, but a donkey, people don't buy the donkey to slaughter it. So, I guess there's some gray area, so that we'd have to figure it out. So Rabba Zabanu Chama Yisrael. So this is the case. Rabba sold a donkey to a Jew. And there, a donkey, you can't say will be slaughtered because there it's only for working. But he sold it to a Jew who was suspected of selling donkeys to idolaters. So basically, he's selling it to the Jew, and the Jew is going to be in violation. My time why are you doing this? He said, I didn't do anything wrong, says Rabbah. I sold it to a Jew. I didn't sell it to an idolater. The Gemara says, yeah, but he's going to go and sell it to an idolater. So the Gemara says, so Rabbah says to Abaye, what are you worried about? So he says, you think he's only selling to a goyim? He's not going to sell to a Jew. This guy can sell it to a Jew. He doesn't say no Jew. I don't do business with Jews. So there too, it's a case of Toah. It's possible for him to say he's selling it to an idolater. So says the Gemara. So Esvei, the Gemara challenges what Rabbah did. Makom shenagu imkor be'emadako akusim, because it says in the Brisa, in a case where there was practice to sell a sheep or a goat, that's called a behemadaka, a small animal, to a kutim. A kutim are these people who are, in this, every Gemara, kuti can mean different things. As a baseline, it means these people who converted but were not sure that they're still Jewish. So they're like quasi-Jews. So the Gemara says that the Brisa says in a place where it's accustomed to sell this sheep or goats to the kutim mochrin, then you're allowed to sell it. And there's no concern that they're going to have intercourse with it. But in a place, shalom kor mochrin, in the case where there was a practice not to sell, you don't sell. My time. What's the reason why? Now here, what's the reason why you're not allowed to sell it? If you want to say, like we said at the beginning of our daf, that idolaters are concerned about intercourse with sheep and goats. Well, there's no concern about that with the kutim. You're not allowed to put your sheep or goats in the houses of the idolaters, even like male or animals with males and females with females. The aim mosrin, and for sure opposite gender, because there's the concern of intercourse. And you can't give your animal to their shepherds. And you're not allowed to be secluded with them. You don't give a child to them to study. And Lamdo Sefer, Lamdo Umnus, to teach him something. But we are allowed to put it in the ends of the kutim. Zachar mates on the cave. The cave also zachar. Ain't zachar zachar mates zachar. And the kavas it's on the cave. Most may know rosh on the altim man. Most of them tina Lamdo Sefer, Lamdo Umnus. So you're allowed to do it with the kuti. You're allowed to do it with the kuti, but you're not allowed to do it with the idolater. So we see that there's no concern about the kuti having the intercourse. So if that's the case, if there's no concern about the kuti having the intercourse, why are you not allowed? Why did our Brisa start off by saying that in certain places, you don't sell the animal to the kuti. So it can't be a concern about intercourse because we're not concerned about that. So Alma Chashidi. So we see we're not concerned about the kuti having the intercourse. So what's the reason we're concerned about that? The reason why you can't sell it to the kuti is because he might go and sell it to an idolater. That's exactly not what Rabbah did. And furthermore, we learned about Tanya, we don't sell them weapons or like the accessories for the weapons. We don't sharpen the weapons for the idolaters. And so you don't give them all these tools of war for the idolaters. You don't give them like the chains. And not only do we not sell to the idolaters, we also don't sell to the kuti. My time, what's the reason? If you want to be concerned, if you want to say the concern is that the kutim are also suspected about murder, are we really concerned that the kutis are murderers? We just say you're not allowed to be, that there's no concern about being secluded with them. So what's the reason why you can't sell it, a weapon to a kuti, is mishum da'asi was a bune lovichalam. We're concerned he might go and sell it to an idolater. This is, of course, relevant for today. The state of Israel sells weapons to countries and to people, and then you have to be concerned not only that the person who you're giving it to is doing not doing anything bad with it, but also that the people who they get it from don't the people who buy it don't then go and sell it to a person who's doing something wrong with it. That's the concern. And if you want to say no, the reason why Rabbah was allowed to sell it to a Jew is because the Jew would repent, whereas the kuti is not going to repent. We have a direct statement that Rav Nachman said in the name of Rabbi Baravua. It's just like you can't sell it to an idolater. You also can't sell it to a Jew who might sell it to the idolater. And so therefore, you weren't allowed to sell it if you think that this guy is going to go around and turn around and sell it to an idolater. So when Rabbah heard this, he ran after the guy who he sold the donkey to, the Jew. He ran after him 3 parsings. Some say he ran after him a 1 parsa in the sand, which is very hard. He wasn't able to catch him. So you have to think twice before you make the sale. Amar Rav Dimi Barabba, just like you're not allowed to sell these weapons to the idolaters, you also can't sell it to Jewish bandits. Now, what's the case we're talking about? If the Jewish bandit is suspected of katil, of killing pshita, well then, of course you can't sell it to him. That's basically the same reason why you can't sell it to an idolater. You're worried he's going to kill. And if this is a Jew who just wants the weapons for protection, he's not going to kill a Milo. Why can't you sell it to him? So the Gemara says, well, we're not concerned he's going to kill. We're talking about, when we say now how to sell to him, we're talking about people who are basically just robbers. They're not murderers. And sometimes, however, that goes south. Sometimes he steals the money, and then they run after him, and then he pulls out his weapon. So you can't sell it to him because of that scenario. Okay, so we're the next piece is going to talk about defensive weapons. Are you allowed to sell idolaters defensive weapons? But we'll stop here. Baruch Hashem. I want to say tomorrow's daf. Okay, tomorrow